If talk of reform and myself is dominating, I'm not there. Look, they are desperately looking for someone to blame for the massive election loss they've just been through. So let's go for Nigel Farage.
They wanted to blame you, or do they want to jump into bed with you? I thought Mr. Jenrick is kind of keen for you, to cuddle up.
Well, he's less rude about me than the other three. I mean, that is true. No, there would be no deal with them. I wouldn't trust them anyway.
Are you proud of Brexit? Do you feel like it's been an unalloyed success?
Do I think getting back our independence was the right thing to do? You bet your life. Do I think we've handled it well? Good Lord, no.
What happens when a political outsider challenges the establishment head-on? Nigel Farage just showed us, and the results were nothing short of explosive. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now, back to the video. In a live debate that set social media ablaze, Farage took on Labour leader Keir Starmer with hard facts and straight talk. The outcome? Starmer was left speechless, and viewers were left wondering, is this the beginning of a political revolution? Farage wasted no time in dropping a bombshell on immigration. He laid out a startling statistic.
Of course, with Labour, it's even worse. And I don't think smashing the gangs is going to work. It's perhaps worth just mentioning briefly that the asylum bill, we've had those figures this morning. I don't know what the true figure is, but it wouldn't be difficult to work out that it would be several multiples of what has been taken away from Britain's pensioners in terms of their winter fuel allowance. So I'm pretty angry about those numbers today. I think the general population will be too. And for Kemi Badenoch to stand up yesterday and read off the autocue as she did.
Out of the last 2 million immigrants from outside the EU, a mere 16% are currently employed. The implications were clear. A significant strain on public services like schools and healthcare. Starmer, caught off guard, attempted to defend Labour's stance, but his rehearsed responses fell flat as Farage unleashed a barrage of data on the economic impact of mass immigration. Mass immigration is making Britain poorer, Farage declared, his words cutting through the political spin. As Starmer fumbled for a rebuttal, Farage painted a vivid picture of overwhelmed local resources. Schools bursting at the seams, hospitals struggling to cope. The rapid population growth, he argued, was pushing public services to breaking point. And Labour's solution? Silence. Starmer's struggle to provide concrete policy answers became painfully apparent. Each evasion, each vague promise only seemed to fuel Farage's determination. The tension in the studio was palpable as Farage hinted at more damning figures to come. Then came the knockout blow.
Immigration figures, which are horrendous. Horrendous if you want to get a GP appointment. Horrendous if you want to travel around Britain's motorways. So let's get it into our heads. In 2023, under a Conservative government, nearly 1 million net people came into our country. And you might have noticed, the quicker the population rises, the poorer the average family in Britain becomes. And those figures are now undeniable.
Farage turned to Labour's track record, his voice filled with barely contained frustration. You've broken your promise time after time after time, he accused. You will never be forgiven for it. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of unfulfilled pledges and shattered trust. Starmer visibly wilted under the onslaught. His usual composed demeanor cracked, revealing a politician clearly rattled by Farage's relentless assault. The audience's reaction spoke volumes, murmurs of agreement, nods of approval. It was clear that Farage's arguments were resonating. As the dust settled, the landscape of the debate had shifted dramatically. Farage, the political outsider, had not just held his own against the Labour leader, he'd left him reeling. The implications were clear. On the issue of immigration, at least, the establishment's grip on the narrative was slipping, and voters were taking notice. The debate had already been a roller coaster, but Farage wasn't done. As Starmer struggled to regain his footing, Farage's eyes glinted with the promise of more to come. Now, Let's talk about something that might surprise you, Keir, he began, his voice carrying a hint of challenge. Starmer, seemingly eager to move on from the immigration debacle, dismissed Reform UK as a fringe party, but his attempt to downplay Farage's influence backfired spectacularly. With a calm assurance that belied the bombshell he was about to drop, Farage revealed recent polling data that painted a very different picture. The numbers were stark. Reform UK wasn't just gaining ground, they were surging. Farage methodically laid out the factors behind this growth: a focus on practical messaging, addressing voters' concerns about immigration and economic reform, and a willingness to challenge the status quo. As he spoke, it became clear that Reform UK was tapping into a deep well of public dissatisfaction with traditional parties. The contrast between Reform UK and Labour couldn't have been starker. Where Labour offered vague promises and political spin, Farage presented concrete policies and straight talk. This approach, he argued, was resonating with voters who felt ignored by mainstream politicians. The studio audience's reactions, nods of agreement, murmurs of approval, seemed to confirm his words. As Farage built his case, the tension in the studio grew palpable. He hinted at even more surprising revelations to come, leaving Starmer visibly uneasy. Then, with perfect timing, Farage dropped his final bombshell. In key constituencies, Reform UK was polling ahead of Labour. The impact was immediate and dramatic. Starmer, who had entered the debate as the confident leader of the opposition, now sat speechless. The dynamic of the entire discussion had shifted. No longer was this a debate between an establishment figure and a political outsider. Farage had positioned himself and Reform UK as serious contenders for power. As the implications sank in, Farage drove his point home. The two-party system, he suggested, was beginning to crumble. With Reform UK and other parties like the Greens gaining ground, the political landscape was changing. And in this new terrain, Farage and Reform UK were positioning themselves as a force to be reckoned with. The debate had started as a discussion on immigration. It ended with a stark warning to the political establishment: ignore the voices of dissatisfaction at your peril. As the cameras prepared to cut away, one thing was clear: British politics would never be the same again. As the dust settles on this explosive debate, it's clear that Nigel Farage has delivered a seismic shock to the political establishment. Keir Starmer, once seen as Labour's great hope, found himself outmaneuvered at every turn. From immigration to economic policy, Farage's relentless barrage of facts and figures left the Labour leader floundering. But the implications of this clash go far beyond a single debate. The surge in support for Reform UK signals a profound shift in the political landscape, with recent polls showing Reform UK at 24%, just ahead of Labour's 23%. The two-party system that has dominated British politics for generations is under serious threat. This raises some pressing questions about the future of democracy in the UK. Are we witnessing the birth of a new political era? How will the established parties respond to this challenge from the political fringes? And perhaps most importantly, what does this mean for the millions of voters who feel left behind by traditional politics? As Britain heads towards its next general election, these questions will be at the forefront of every voter's mind.